Benjamin Netanyahu boards Air Force One equivalent in less than 48 hours. And what Trump is about to tell him will redefine the entire Middle East. But here's what nobody in Washington is saying about why this meeting was scheduled so quickly, and why it might be the last chance to prevent what's coming. Wednesday morning, February 15th, Netanyahu lands in Washington. His team has been preparing briefing materials for 72 hours straight, working through the night. Satellite imagery of Iranian missile facilities, production rate assessments showing 300 new Kabar-Shikan missiles manufactured every single month, intelligence reports confirming that Iran now possesses over 2,000 ballistic missiles, with ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers. That's 8 times the distance from Iran to Israel. And Netanyahu is coming to Washington with one demand, a demand he's made publicly 3 times in the last week, a demand his cabinet unanimously supports. Ballistic missiles must be restricted to 300-kilometer maximum range. Anything beyond that threatens Israeli territory and cannot be accepted under any circumstances. Now think about what that demand actually means. Trump's negotiators just spent Friday in Oman trying to restart talks with Iran. The talks collapsed within hours. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told mediators explicitly that missile programs are non-negotiable red lines. Not open for discussion, not now, not ever. So Netanyahu is flying to Washington to demand something Iran has already rejected. And he's telling Trump to make it happen, or Israel will act independently. That's the impossible position facing Trump on Wednesday. And here's why the answer he gives Netanyahu will shock everyone, including Israel's own government. Multiple sources in the Pentagon confirmed this morning that Trump's response has already been drafted. The National Security Team finalized the talking points yesterday. And what those talking points contain is not what Netanyahu expects. It's not what his coalition government wants to hear. It's definitely not what Israeli hawks anticipated. Because Trump is about to tell Netanyahu something no American president has said to an Israeli prime minister in 50 years. And when that message is delivered Wednesday, the consequences will cascade through every capital from Tehran to Riyadh to Beijing. But to understand why Trump's answer will be so shocking, you need to understand what happened on Saturday, February 8th, just 5 days ago, the day that changed everything. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner flew to the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. They toured the carrier, met with F-35 pilots, briefed commanders on operational readiness. The official story was thanking the troops. The real story was assessing whether the carrier group could execute strikes against Iranian missile facilities if Trump authorized them. And here's what Witkoff and Kushner learned during that visit, information that went straight back to Trump and directly shaped his response to Netanyahu's demands. The Lincoln is vulnerable. Not theoretically vulnerable, actually operationally vulnerable in ways that American carrier groups have not been vulnerable in decades. Douglas Macgregor, former senior Pentagon advisor, warned publicly 48 hours ago that China has provided Iran with advanced anti-ship missile technology and real-time satellite targeting. That means Iranian forces can track the Lincoln's exact position continuously and launch hypersonic anti-ship missiles with precision that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Sinking an American aircraft carrier would kill 5,000 sailors. It would represent the single worst American military loss since World War II, triggering automatic escalation. So when Witkoff and Kushner returned from the Lincoln, they told Trump something his military advisors have been reluctant to say publicly, but can't ignore privately. Using the carrier to strike Iranian missile sites carries unacceptable risk. The strategic gain does not justify gambling with 5,000 American lives and potential carrier loss. That assessment is now baked into Trump's response to Netanyahu. And it's why what Trump says Wednesday will shock Israel and potentially fracture the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Because Netanyahu isn't coming to discuss options. He's coming to deliver an ultimatum. Multiple Israeli sources confirmed his position is final and non-negotiable. If Trump doesn't force Iran to accept missile restrictions, Israel will authorize unilateral strikes on Iranian facilities, with or without American approval or support. And when Iran retaliates against those Israeli strikes, they'll hit American bases throughout the region because those bases provide logistical and intelligence support to Israeli operations. So Trump gets dragged into a regional conflict he didn't authorize, facing the exact scenario his military advisors warned him about because Netanyahu acted independently. That's the trap Netanyahu is setting. Either Trump commits to military action against Iran now, or Netanyahu triggers that action himself and forces Trump to respond anyway. Except Trump's answer on Wednesday will not be what Netanyahu expects. And that's where this entire situation gets really interesting, because Trump is about to call the bluff. Hit the like button if you see where this is heading. Drop a comment telling me whether you think Trump will back Netanyahu or leave Israel on its own. Let's see your predictions. Here's what Netanyahu's team has been telling Israeli media for the past week. They're framing this Washington visit as the moment Trump either commits or abandons Israel. Israeli newspapers are running headlines suggesting that American hesitation emboldens Iran. That diplomatic delays only give Tehran more time to build missiles and entrench defenses. Netanyahu's coalition partners, the far-right members who keep his government alive, are publicly stating that Israel cannot wait while Iran produces 300 new missiles every month. And they're arguing that if America won't act, Israel must, because the window for effective military action is closing as Iranian defenses improve and arsenals expand. That's the narrative Netanyahu is bringing to Washington. The story he'll tell Trump on Wednesday to justify immediate action and demand American support for Israeli strikes. But Trump's national security team has been conducting their own assessment, and their conclusions are dramatically different from what Netanyahu's government is claiming publicly. First, strikes on Iranian missile facilities would not eliminate Iran's ballistic missile capability. The sites are dispersed, hardened, and many are located in underground facilities. Even a comprehensive air campaign hitting dozens of targets simultaneously would destroy perhaps 30% of Iran's missile inventory at most, leaving what they 500 missiles operational and intact. Second, Iran would retaliate immediately, not just against Israel, but against American forces in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and against the Lincoln Carrier Group itself. American casualties would be significant. Dozens, maybe hundreds of service members killed in the initial Iranian response before any American counterstrikes could be authorized and executed. Third, the conflict would not remain limited. Once shooting starts between American forces and Iranian forces, escalation dynamics take over and nobody controls where it stops. That's the assessment Trump's team has provided him. That's the reality Netanyahu's demands run directly into when he lands in Washington in 48 hours and asks for American commitment. And that's why Trump's answer will shock Israel. Because Trump is going to say no. Not maybe, not we'll consider it, not let's wait and see, just no. Trump is going to tell Netanyahu that the United States will not support unilateral Israeli strikes on Iranian missile facilities. And he's going to explain exactly why. Not because Trump has suddenly become pro-Iran, not because he's abandoned Israel, but because his military advisors have shown him what actually happens if those strikes occur. The day after Israeli F-35s hit Iranian missile sites, ballistic missiles rain down on American bases in Iraq. Al-Assad Air Base takes direct hits, dozens of casualties. American forces in Syria come under attack. Rockets, drones, coordinated assaults by Iranian-backed militias that have been waiting for this moment for months, fully prepared and positioned. The Lincoln Carrier Group becomes a target. Anti-ship missiles launch from Iranian coastal batteries, hypersonic weapons traveling at speeds that give defensive systems seconds to react. Even if the carrier survives, even if American defenses intercept most incoming missiles, the United States is now in open combat with Iran across multiple theaters simultaneously. And Trump has to authorize counterstrikes. He has no choice. American forces have been attacked, casualties have been taken, and doing nothing is politically impossible domestically. So F-35s from the Lincoln launch against Iranian targets. Tomahawk cruise missiles hit command centers. And the regional conflict everyone tried to prevent has begun anyway. That's the scenario Trump's national security team has walked him through. That's the future Netanyahu's unilateral action leads to, whether Netanyahu acknowledges it publicly or not. And Trump is going to tell Netanyahu on Wednesday that he will not allow Israeli decisions to drag American forces into a war Trump believes is unwinnable and unnecessary. Now here's where this gets really complicated, because Trump isn't just saying no to Netanyahu. He's proposing an alternative that Netanyahu will hate even more than rejection. Sources close to the White House confirmed yesterday that Trump's team has been developing a containment strategy. Not regime change, not military strikes, containment through deterrence. The idea is simple, but requires Israel to accept something it has refused to accept for 40 years. That Iran will have ballistic missiles, and the solution is defense, not offense. Trump is going to offer Netanyahu the most advanced missile defense systems America possesses. Thaadi batteries. Additional Iron Dome interceptors, integrated early warning networks, technology that can shoot down Iranian missiles in flight, protecting Israeli cities and infrastructure without requiring strikes on Iranian territory that trigger wider regional war. But there's a catch, a massive catch that makes this offer almost impossible for Netanyahu to accept politically. Trump wants something in return that Israel has resisted for decades, restraint. Guaranteed Israeli restraint from unilateral military action against Iran without American approval. A binding commitment that Israel will not strike first, regardless of provocation. That's the deal Trump is bringing to Wednesday's meeting. Defensive capabilities in exchange for offensive restraint, protection in exchange for partnership on decision-making about military action. And Netanyahu cannot accept that deal. Not because it's strategically unsound, but because his coalition government depends on far-right parties that demand aggressive action against Iran. If Netanyahu returns to Israel and announces he agreed not to strike Iran unilaterally, his government collapses within days. His coalition partners withdraw support, elections follow. So Netanyahu is trapped. He can't accept Trump's offer without losing power domestically, but he can't reject it without losing American support for any future military action. That's the bind Trump is putting Netanyahu in. And it's why Trump's answer on Wednesday will shock not just Israel, but every American ally watching how Trump handles this pressure. Because Trump is essentially telling Netanyahu that America will not be manipulated into war through Israeli unilateral action. That if Israel wants American support, Israel accepts American veto power. Some analysts are calling this a fundamental shift in U.S.-Israeli relations. The first time an American president has explicitly conditioned military support on Israeli restraint from independent strikes. Others see it as Trump trying to avoid the exact trap that Netanyahu is setting. The trap where Israeli action forces American response, and Trump loses control of escalation. But here's what nobody in Washington is discussing publicly. What happens if Netanyahu rejects Trump's offer and Israel strikes Iran anyway without American approval or support? Does Trump defend Israel when Iran retaliates? Does he provide intelligence and logistics to Israeli operations, even after explicitly telling Netanyahu not to conduct those operations? Or does Trump leave Israel to face Iranian retaliation alone, demonstrating to Netanyahu and to the world that American red lines actually mean something when they're crossed? That's the question keeping Pentagon planners awake this week. Because if Trump follows through on his threat to withhold support, the U.S.-Israeli alliance faces its biggest test since 1956. In October 1956, Israel, Britain, and France invaded Egypt during the Suez Crisis. President Eisenhower was furious. He threatened economic sanctions and forced all three nations to withdraw. It was the last time an American president openly opposed Israeli military action and backed that opposition with concrete threats. And it worked. Israel withdrew. The crisis ended. Trump's team has been studying the Suez precedent, looking at how Eisenhower used economic and diplomatic pressure to enforce American preferences over Israeli objections without fracturing the alliance permanently. The difference is that in 1956, Israel was economically vulnerable and militarily dependent on outside support. In 2026, Israel is far more self-sufficient and far less susceptible to American pressure. Netanyahu knows this, his government knows this, and they're calculating that Trump won't actually follow through on threats to withhold support if Iran retaliates against Israeli strikes. They believe Trump will blink, that when Iranian missiles are falling on Tel Aviv, Trump will authorize American forces to help intercept them regardless of his previous warnings. That's the bet Netanyahu is making, that Trump's threats are posturing meant to restrain Israel publicly while still providing support privately when Israel acts anyway despite those threats. And honestly, Netanyahu might be right. Because American presidents have been making similar threats to Israeli leaders for decades, and American support has always materialized when needed. But Trump is not like previous American presidents. And that's what makes Wednesday's meeting so unpredictable and potentially so dangerous for the broader regional stability. Trump has shown repeatedly that he's willing to break with precedent when he believes precedent isn't serving American interests, that he'll abandon traditional allies if he thinks they're dragging America into conflicts. Afghanistan withdrawal, 2021. Trump negotiated the deal, Biden executed it, but the message was clear. America will leave allies behind if the cost of staying exceeds the value. So when Trump tells Netanyahu on Wednesday that America won't support unilateral Israeli strikes, Netanyahu has to calculate whether Trump actually means it or whether it's just negotiating posture. And the problem is that nobody knows for sure. Not Netanyahu's advisors, not Trump's own national security team. Because Trump makes these decisions personally and often contradicts his advisors. That uncertainty is what makes the next 48 hours so critical. Netanyahu is preparing for a meeting where the American response is genuinely unpredictable and the stakes are regional war. So what is Netanyahu actually bringing to Washington? What's in the briefing materials his team has been preparing for 72 hours straight since the Oman talks collapsed Friday? First, updated intelligence on Iranian missile production facilities. Locations that Mossad has been tracking for years, some never shared with Americans before until now. Underground complexes near Parchin, southeast of Tehran, hardened bunkers near Isfahan, where missile components are manufactured, and facilities buried deep under mountains and rock. Netanyahu's team will show Trump satellite imagery proving that Iran is expanding production capacity. Not just maintaining current rates, but actively building new facilities to increase output. The message is clear. Waiting doesn't make the problem smaller. Every month of diplomatic delay means 300 more missiles in Iranian arsenals and deeper, more sophisticated defensive networks. Second, Netanyahu is bringing intelligence on Chinese support for Iranian military programs. Evidence of technology transfers that dramatically increase Iranian capabilities against American forces in the region. Hypersonic anti-ship missile designs provided by Chinese defense contractors. Guidance systems that allow Iranian missiles to track moving targets with precision impossible just 5 years ago. This intelligence is designed to convince Trump that the window for effective military action is closing, that Iranian defenses are improving faster than American offensive capabilities can adapt to them. Third, and this is the argument Netanyahu believes will resonate most with Trump personally, economic consequences that affect American interests directly, not just Israeli security concerns alone. If Iran expands its program unchecked, Saudi Arabia has privately indicated it will pursue its own capabilities. The Saudis have told Israeli and American officials this explicitly in recent months. Egypt would follow. Turkey would accelerate its research. Within years, the Middle East becomes a region where miscalculation could trigger exchanges nobody wants, but nobody can prevent once started. That's the scenario Netanyahu will describe. Not just Israeli security at risk, but fundamental American strategic interests collapsing because Trump chose restraint over action when action was still possible. And Netanyahu will frame this as Trump's legacy moment, the decision that either prevents regional instability or enables it, with consequences lasting decades beyond Trump's presidency and administration. Now here's the problem with Netanyahu's entire argument. It's not wrong, but it's incomplete. It focuses exclusively on risks of inaction, while ignoring risks of action just as serious. Trump's advisors have prepared counter-briefings, analysis showing that operations trigger the exact regional destabilization Netanyahu claims inaction will cause. Just faster and with immediate American casualties? Iran retaliates against American bases. Trump authorizes counterstrikes. Iran hits oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and UAE. Global oil prices spike above $150 per barrel almost overnight. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a zone where forces engage daily. 20% of global oil supply routes through waters where American and Iranian assets are targeting each other continuously. Global recession begins within weeks, not because of future scenarios, but because energy markets collapse immediately when conflict starts in the Persian Gulf and supply chains break down globally. American public turns against involvement quickly. Casualties mount, gas prices double, and voters demand withdrawal from conflicts they never supported, starting in the first place or understood fully. That's what Trump's team will argue Wednesday when Netanyahu makes his case. That the choice isn't between action and inaction, but between two different difficult scenarios with different timelines, operations that trigger immediate regional conflict and economic collapse, or containment strategy that buys time while preparing defensive systems to protect against threats without sparking wider war. And Trump is going to choose containment, not because he trusts Iran, but because his military advisors cannot guarantee success without unacceptable costs to American forces and global economy. When Witkoff and Kushner toured the Lincoln 5 days ago, they came back with assessments that made Trump's decision easier. The carrier faces risks, operations carry costs exceeding strategic benefits. So Wednesday's meeting becomes less about whether Trump will support operations and more about how Trump delivers the decision without completely fracturing the relationship that's existed for decades. Because Trump needs Netanyahu to accept the position without immediately authorizing independent action that forces American response and creates the exact scenario Trump is actively trying to avoid here. That's the diplomatic challenge. How does Trump say no firmly enough that Netanyahu understands it's final, but carefully enough that Netanyahu doesn't feel cornered into acting alone regardless? The answer involves those defensive systems Trump is offering. THAAD batteries, Iron Dome interceptors, integrated networks that make cities safer without requiring operations that trigger regional conflict. Trump will frame this as strengthening security through defense rather than offense, protecting citizens while avoiding wider conflict that threatens American interests and regional stability for everyone involved. But he'll also make clear that American support depends on restraint. That independent action might mean those defensive systems aren't available when retaliation comes against cities and infrastructure. It's a two-sided approach, massive security assistance in exchange for accepting partnership on decisions regarding Iran. Cooperation, but on terms that give America influence over timing and scope. Netanyahu lands in Washington Wednesday morning. He'll walk into the White House knowing Trump's answer before the meeting even begins, but he has to hear it directly. And when Trump delivers that answer, when he explains why America won't support operations against Iranian facilities, Netanyahu faces a choice that defines his entire political legacy. Accept Trump's position and return to Israel with defensive systems, but no authorization for offensive action. His coalition government likely collapses within days as far-right partners abandon him immediately. Or reject Trump's offer and authorize Israeli operations independently. Gambling that American presidents always protect Israel regardless of previous warnings, betting Trump will support Israel when Iran retaliates. That gamble is what makes the next 72 hours so dangerous. Because if Netanyahu chooses independent action, Trump has already decided how he'll respond, and that response will shock everyone watching. Multiple Pentagon sources confirmed this morning that contingency orders have been drafted. Instructions for American commanders throughout the region covering scenarios where Israel acts without coordination. Those orders do not include automatic American military support. They include defensive postures to protect American forces from Iranian retaliation, while avoiding direct involvement in exchanges between Israel and Iran. Translation: if Israel strikes Iran independently, American forces won't participate in follow-up operations. They'll defend American bases, but they won't help Israel hit additional Iranian targets afterward. That's unprecedented. Every previous Israeli operation against regional threats has included American intelligence support, logistics coordination, and implicit backing, even when Washington publicly expressed concerns. But Trump's orders change that precedent. They establish that independent Israeli action means truly independent consequences, without automatic American involvement, regardless of what Iran does in response afterward. Netanyahu's advisors understand this. They've been reading American signals for weeks, watching how Trump's team talks about the Lincoln visit, analyzing the language in Pentagon statements carefully. And they're divided. Some believe Trump is bluffing, that he'll support Israel when missiles start flying regardless of his current position. Others think Trump actually means it this time around. That uncertainty is what makes this situation so unstable. Both sides are operating with incomplete information about how the other will respond, creating conditions where miscalculation becomes almost inevitable here. History is full of moments where leaders thought they understood each other's red lines and discovered too late they were wrong. August 1914, leaders thought mobilization was just posturing before war. October 1973, Arab states thought Israel wouldn't respond decisively to coordinated attacks during Yom Kippur. Israel nearly used extreme options before American intervention stabilized the deteriorating situation. The pattern repeats. Leaders misread signals, act based on assumptions, and discover that the other side's response exceeds anything they planned for or anticipated in their strategic calculations. That's the risk Wednesday. Netanyahu might walk out believing Trump's position is negotiable, that Israel can act and America will adjust. Trump might think his warning was clear and final, and then Israel strikes Iranian facilities 3 weeks from now. Iran retaliates against American bases. Trump faces the decision his advisors warned him about, but hoped he'd never actually confront directly. Markets are already pricing in this uncertainty. Defense contractors see potential for massive orders, whether conflict happens or gets avoided through deterrent spending and system purchases. Gold hasn't spiked yet because investors still believe diplomacy will work. But options traders are buying protection against oil price surges, betting that someone miscalculates in the next 30 days. And that volatility reflects the fundamental reality facing Trump and Netanyahu on Wednesday. Neither leader fully controls the outcome anymore, even though both believe they're still driving events forward. Iran has agency. Tehran makes decisions based on its own calculations about regime survival and regional influence. If Iran believes it's being backed into a corner, it acts regardless of American preferences. China has interests. Beijing doesn't want regional war-disrupting oil supplies, but it also doesn't want to see American operations succeeding against a Chinese partner like Iran without consequences. So Wednesday's meeting between Trump and Netanyahu isn't just about relations between two countries. It's about how every regional and global power interprets American resolve and Israeli intentions going forward. If Trump says no and Netanyahu accepts, Iran might see it as weakness and push harder in future negotiations. If Trump says no and Netanyahu acts anyway, every American ally questions reliability. What we know for certain is this: Netanyahu boards his plane Tuesday evening, arrives Wednesday morning, meets with Trump for perhaps 90 minutes, and leaves with an answer that shapes regional dynamics. That answer has already been drafted. Trump's team finalized talking points yesterday, but implementation depends on Netanyahu's response, Israel's actions afterward, and Iran's calculations about American seriousness. Watch what Netanyahu says after the meeting. If he emphasizes partnership and cooperation, Trump's offer worked. If he talks about Israel's right to self-defense and independent action, Trump's warning failed. And if Netanyahu says nothing substantive, if he gives vague statements about productive discussions and ongoing consultations, that means he's still deciding whether to accept Trump's position or gamble. The silence after Wednesday's meeting might be the loudest signal of all, because silence means uncertainty, and uncertainty means the crisis isn't resolved, it's just paused while leaders calculate next moves. February 15th, 2026, the day Trump tells Netanyahu something no American president has said in 50 years, and the day Netanyahu decides whether to accept that answer or bet everything on Trump blinking first.